Welcome to the AI+HI project. I'm Nichol Bradford, SHRM's executive in residence for AI+HI. Thank you for joining us. Each week, we sit down with visionaries from the worlds of business, tech, and HR to provide you with deep insights, actionable strategies, and practical advice for harnessing the transformative potential of artificial intelligence, AI, combined with human ingenuity, HI. This week, we're exploring AI and the future of work, particularly the social and cultural trends surrounding this area. Our guest this week is Kelly Monahan, Managing Director of the Research Institute of Upwork. Welcome to the AI+HI project, Kelly.
Thanks so much, Nicole.
Kelly, I love your research and I love the thought leadership that you have been putting out. And I have followed your career for a while. And so you span academia, consulting, and now you're leading research at Upwork. What inspired you to focus on the intersection of behavioral economics, AI, and the future of work?
Nicole, it's such a great question. And I just love the heart of what this podcast is with the AI plus human ingenuity, because that speaks a lot to how I ended up with where I am today. So I got this awesome opportunity after my PhD program to start a behavioral economics and future of work research institute within Deloitte. And at first, I got really excited about it because of the technology that we were seeing take place. At the time, it was robotic process automation, cloud computing. And what I slowly began to realize after about 10 years in that space is that the technology wasn't the problem. It was our human behavior and the human side. And how do we actually bring forward human ingenuity with all these tech changes? And I saw all this leadership and research emphasis on understanding the technology and the productivity gains, and very little on the HR space. And what does this actually mean for talent management? And in fact, one of the things I say often is oftentimes a lot of our HR practices, if we were to be honest, really derive from a time and period that no longer resembles how we work today.
Yeah. Well, and I saw that you have a new book out or coming out soon, Essential Leadership. And in Essential, you discuss human powered leadership in the age of AI. Can you elaborate on what that concept means and why it's crucial for modern organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. So, really, my co author and I, Christy Smith, we decided as we were looking at the space that, again, there's so many other experts who can really go deep on the machine learning and algorithms. But yet, we know that business leaders today have to have some level of acumen of what does this again mean from a human intelligence perspective. And our belief is that the more that AI continues to infuse within our organizations, the human side becomes that much more essential to the business. And that actually becomes the value proposition and differentiator that we believe is going to separate companies in the future. We really wanted to get back to the basics of what is the essentials that you have to get right as a leader today. And what we talk about is actually starts with yourself and it begins with your mindset is are you ready to transcend your ego and really suspend your self-interest? Because if we're going to get this right today, so much of how we think about work really comes from a place of self-interest. And so we wanted to turn that notion upside down and ask leaders, it's no longer about what can no longer what employees can do for you and your organization. Rather, it's what can you do for people? How can your organization or how your leadership actually meet greater societal and human needs? And when you start with that flip and frame, everything changes. And then the second thing we say as an essential characteristic of leaders today is this behavior of cultivating curiosity. Leaders say we have to be relentless in our curiosity and questioning the changing world around us. We have to get curious about it and not resist it. And then finally, at the end of the day, we're still in business and we know business is good for entrepreneurship and society and having economic gain. So we have to create cultures of excellence. And you can only do that by meeting very human needs. And so we begin to unpack in the book that playbook and what that actually looks like when all of that flywheel is spinning with this new leadership essential.
Yeah, this is so brilliant because I think what people are starting to understand is that, especially for AI and AI implementations, and this was true with predictive and machine learning, but it's even more true, it appears with generative AI,
Mhm.
that it is a social, cultural, behavioral
Yeah.
transformation that has technology involved. So you have to have the data and you have to have the technology, but that is insufficient for success. To have
Yes.
success, it's changing ways of doing people and
Mhm.
culture. And I love that your book is really pointing back towards leaders
Yeah.
and leadership and what they need to do. And I think that probably, I don't know, by the, as more companies are starting to experiment and have success and failure,
Mm,
I think they're going to realize and see the examples of success are the ones where people are behaving in an essential way.
mm, love that.
And then, and people do seek to mimic success.
Yes.
So I'm really excited about that. So one of the studies that you recently did had very surprising findings. Could you walk us through how you what you found that was surprising and how you did that research?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we went in with the hypothesis that there's just all this hype right now around AI. And so we actually designed the research thinking, okay, we know, inflation just happened to be coming down a bit. But the reality is over the last 12 months, cash has gotten much more expensive for organizations. We know the majority of people, and I'm sure your audience can relate to this, is having to do more with less. And so we thought, hey, you know what? AI is going to come in and really help alleviate this productivity concern many leaders are feeling. And so that was our hypothesis going in, and we thought we were gonna kinda have this feel good study about how AI is changing the world. But what we found, it was a surprise to us as researchers, is that right now, the way that AI is being incorporated in many organizations, the workforce is actually feeling burned out because of that. And not just that, 47% of workers in our study told us that they actually have no clue how to gain more productivity with the use of these new tools. And so I went out and I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into this surprise. And what we found is happening is many organizations, rightfully so, are trying to jump on the AI hype. But the reality is, all they're doing is signing up for license and giving access to a large language model. Very few training and skilling in place. In fact, our research found only 26% of leaders actually have an AI formal training and skilling program in place today. So what's happening is there's this new technology, people are already burned out, having to do more with less, and now there's just a whole new tech stack coming in, and they really don't know how to utilize it. And leaders haven't created a compelling vision of how to actually execute and rechange the way that they're doing work. And so to me as a researcher, and I don't know if you agree with this, but what our data signals is, again, it's not technology that's the problem here. I actually think generative AI is being underutilized in many cases, not overutilized, but we're not doing the deeper transformation when it comes to talent management, giving people permission to actually change the way they're doing their job, giving people permission, to really think differently about their work, really much more an emphasis on the skills that are required and how they can collaborate alongside of AI to create more co-intelligence. And so I worry that we've got a lot of AI use out there without the proper transformation in place to actually have people feel good about it and actually become more productive as a result of this.
Yep. One of your stats that really caught my eye was that it was the percentage of CEOs who said, "Oh, this is going to make us more productive," and that 77% of your respondents actually said, "No, my workload has just increased." Could you say a little bit more about that?
Totally. So that the number, you're absolutely right, it was 96% of executives were expecting AI to decrease workload for employees. So we dug into that a little bit more in the data of why did 77% of employees say, hey, actually, this new technology is creating more work for me. And we found a couple things back in our survey respondents. Number one, it was a skilling and pressure of learning a new technology. That was actually adding to their workload. Also, what we're finding is, again, these are large language models. They're not 100% accurate. And so, what employees were realizing is they were having a lot to go back and rather audit the work or redo the work, really having to have that, again, that much needed human intervention right now is part of that. And they found it was actually taking more time because they were having to redo a lot of the work that they had hoped that AI was going to do in the very onset. Now, I think we're going to get past some of these. Again, this is a jagged frontier. This is new use cases, but employees weren't expecting that, which signals to me the leaders weren't setting the right expectations of the realities of this tool, what it's good at, what it's not good at. And then finally, we continue just to hear just overburdened overall workload concerns that there's been a lot of, whether it's been reduction in workforce or just right sizing of organizations, and employees are having to feel like they're wearing multiple hats today within their roles. And that's happening at the same time as they're trying to learn how to use this new tool.
Yes, and already the nature of roles has changed. I think I saw a study that said that, the average job today actually is 8 jobs combined. And then now you bring in another tool that people are not it's are not, they're not sure how to use.
Sure.
It creates a lot more volume. If you don't
Yep.
start with your expertise, you end up with word salad. And,
Love that.
and it takes more time, and so they're just really overwhelmed,
Yeah.
and there's a leadership gap
Yeah.
around it, which is one of the reasons why I think essential leadership is so interesting. I would love to talk about work redesign itself. When you and I first met, we were talking about how many people were thinking about generative AI purely in terms of cost efficiency, like, oh, how much cost can I cut out? But I think what we're starting to see is that the real transformation comes from the work redesign. And so I'd love to hear what you learned about that and what you think about that after your study.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to share with you. We haven't published this yet, but I'd love to share with you some of the data we're seeing on our platform that I think begins to help people understand this revolution we're actually in. So, I'm at Upwork and we get to see a labor market every day in action. And so we went back and looked at robotic process automation and cloud computing. And to your point, those were plays that were efficiency plays. And we saw that on our platform. Those jobs are really narrowly focused in data science, analytics, web and software development. We didn't see that sort of technology in that job role cut across any other category. I mean, those were really gained in the IT profession, data science, software engineering, and then a lot of people in the back end, a lot of people don't even understand or see some of those processes that are happening that have made us more efficient. Generative AI is truly a game changer. And the reason why I say that is if you look at our job market, what you see is generative AI is cutting across all categories of work. It's really, in fact, before generative AI came out and it was just AI machine learning, 60% of our jobs were still in that traditional kind of IT software engineering category. Today, that's 40%. And that's because the 60% is spread across writing, marketing, operations, even management, talent development. And so we're beginning to see this becoming much more of a general use technology. And so that to me, that means everyone's got to be in this game. This is not just an IT play. This is not just an efficiency play. This is truly how do I do my job differently because of this technology? And I'm not sure we've had to ask ourselves that question really maybe since the internet has come on to play because all the other technologies have been happening in the background of how we work. This is front and center. And if you are not thinking and approaching your job today, thinking through what can I do differently because of generative AI? What does generative AI do that I either can't do or that it does better? And at the end of the day, what you're going to find out for those that are playing around with this tool today, I love what you said. It's not so much efficiency, it's coaching, it's learning and development, it's knowledge creation. It's actually going to allow us, I think, to become much more intelligent in our job as we're able to take that collective intelligence that's existing in these large language models and really become much more, the phrase that Thomas Malone has used, like superhuman in the way that we do our jobs.
Your work highlights a disconnect between executive perception and employee readiness. How can leaders bridge that gap? What do they need to do to really bridge that gap to get the employees ready for AI integration?
Yeah. This one has been tough to study because you're absolutely right. Our data has found that leaders are perceiving that their workforce is ready for this revolution and that they have, the readiness within their workforce. But the reality is the majority of the workers are not ready. They are not skilled. They don't have experience working with this new technology. And so again, this to me is a leadership issue. How do we begin to make more runways within our organizations for learning and development? The reality is, if we think about the way most people are rewarded from a performance management perspective, we reward outputs. We reward what have you done for me lately, as opposed to how have you learned, what have you developed, and how are you developing those around you. I just can only imagine what would happen with our organizations if we actually wired performance management for learning and development purposes and outcomes, as opposed to efficiency and doing more of the same, but faster and cheaper, which is the reality of how many of us are, managed from a performance perspective. So this is a wake up call for leaders. If you're not managing and rewarding learning and development, your workforce is going to get left behind.
And also, I think it's a wake-up call for managers to really do the part of unlocking the potential of the people that they oversee. I think one of the, outputs or side effects of this will be, I call it nowhere to hide. So if someone's not a great manager, if they haven't personally learned how to be a good manager, if they haven't done the work that they need to do from what you said at the top of this call around, um, what the work they need to do around their own ego and how they really unlock the value of their employees and allow them to move into the learning and the thinking and the work that isn't just output,
Yeah.
they're going to be revealed. Like, there's
Yeah.
no place to hide, is, I think, what's going to happen.
I love it. I actually am so curious to get your perspective on this. I think that's brilliant. I love that language too. There's nowhere to hide. So I was actually with a group of CHROs last week, and we were talking about how hard it is to get the essentials of leadership right that I just talked about, and how difficult it is for their middle managers in particular to actually do the people side and the development side of their employees. And so, the CHRO asked a pretty thought provoking question was, well, why wouldn't we just outsource this to large language models? This is something that large language models might be able to do better. It takes the burden off. And I don't know, like there's something that's not sitting right with me about that. And I can't really quite articulate yet why that is. But I'm curious, like, what's your view too of how we're thinking through? Because to your point, there's going to be nowhere to hide. My fear is our leaders going to just outsource this people side to AI as opposed to actually doing the hard work themselves.
That that's a great question. It's
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, so technology as we know it has been with us for a very short time. Like, this
Mm,
technology that we're talking about has been with us for a very, very short time.
yeah.
But human biology and the way that we are wired, the way our nervous systems are wired, the way that we learn, the neuroscience of learning, connection, development, all of these things, this has been with us for a very, very, very long time. And so
Yeah.
the danger in outsourcing that is
Mm,
that humans still need humans, and biological evolution takes a very long time. And so humans still need humans. And so, you know, what I've seen in other product categories is the most successful interventions, say
yeah.
around mental and emotional health, are things that combine a human in the loop. There is a human who is guiding you and coaching you and connecting with you and witnessing you.
Yeah.
Technology that provides 24/7 support, and that might be very empathetic technology.
Yeah.
And then another piece of technology that is measuring data, which might be, you know, heart rate variability and other things. But the real breakthroughs when people are having
Yeah.
significant breakthroughs for mental health, emotional health, and issues like that. It's
Yeah.
when you have all three, that really is a profound system. And
Yeah.
so, people still need people.
Yeah.
And I think there's a danger in thinking one can outsource that. And the desire to outsource it has a great deal to do with the fact that we've never really been taught how to be human. We've never
Mm,
been taught how to be with one another emotionally. When you
yeah.
look at performance management,
Yeah.
people really dislike giving feedback. When you have cultures,
True.
dynamic cultures or growth cultures, feedback is a part of the process. And so there's just things we're uncomfortable with. And if we get better at being more comfortable with that, then I think that, you know, people will enjoy that part of the work because that actually also is the fun part.
Yeah. Nicole, I love what you just said. And I almost wonder, like, maybe this is going to be a surprising revolution for us in the workplace because what you just said is so spot on. And I think this has been the sin of our, workplace management is we've grown up in the industrial era where our theories are, and we really treat people as if we are cogs in a wheel. And like we haven't brought in the biology and the neuroscience. And so maybe this is going to force us to reckon with these other disciplines that we really haven't brought into the business world. But I think you're spot on because if we want higher productivity alongside AI, we got to get smarter about how we're wired from a biological perspective and a neuroscience perspective as humans And maybe in a strange way, this is actually going to make, humanities really come to the forefront because of all this AI advancement that's happening in our workplaces.
I think the most dynamic, high performing organizations will be the ones that recognize that that is already in the
Oh,
workplace and
yeah.
it's time to pay attention to it because
Yes.
it's already
Love
wherever
it.
humans are, that's already happening. And so my hope is that the desire for success, the desire to succeed will motivate people to do the things that we've been giving lip service to for quite some time.
Mhm.
But I want to ask you a question about
Yes.
freelancers because you're on the back of so much data. It's such a
Yes.
perfect place to be. So you've noted that freelancers often have more advanced AI skills than regular
Yeah.
employees. Why do you think this is, and how do you think that will impact the future composition of workforces?
Yeah, I absolutely love this question because I think this is maybe surprising to individuals, those of us who've been in full time employee models for a long time. The reality is, freelancers are on the cutting edge of new technology. And when we got this finding, I was surprised too. And I went and asked a whole bunch of freelancers on our platform, why is this? There's two key reasons I heard in our research. Number one, a lot of organizations actually have mandates that don't allow their workforce right now to use generative AI tools, or there's a lot of bureaucracy when it comes to actually experimentation. And so they don't necessarily, many organizations aren't wired for experimentation and trying new tools. Freelancers are outside of all of that. They can go ahead and at speed and scale, start experimenting and playing around with AI tools. The second reason is their livelihood depends on it. And so like they don't sell a job, they sell a skill. And I think that is actually where the future of organizations is heading towards too, which is makes freelancers a much easier match towards that. I worry as a full-time employee myself even, we think of ourselves as in a job, not in terms of the skills we have. And that's where we become stagnant. Where if you think about yourself, of what's the skills I need, what's coming next, freelancers are wired and thinking that way. And it's a much more organic fit for them to stay ahead of this curve than it is for many organizations today.
And the other place where people are adopting intensely are small, medium-sized
Yeah.
businesses where they don't have the legacy, infrastructure or bias or ways of doing things, and I think one of the things you're gonna start to see are smaller businesses really punch above their weight
Mhm.
by being on the cutting edge of what AI adoption looks like. That leads to another question really about, what is success and how do we measure ROI? And so, when we think about productivity, as
Yeah.
we're comparing sort of freelancers to regular organizations or more established organizations. So for those more established organizations, how do they need to shift how they measure productivity metrics in order to support this transformation? Earlier you mentioned focus on learning, but maybe something a little bit more tactile about what they can do.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. So I was in front of a group of executives 2 weeks ago, a different group, giving a presentation, and I asked a question that I thought was going to be a simple question. I asked the question in the room is, what is productivity today? And it was pin drops. And then, a couple people responded like, I'm not really actually quite sure how we measure that today or what that looks like. And someone kind of raised their hand and said, well, maybe it's like hours worked, some sort of metric like that. And I think that's what our research is finding is that many organizations today are still thinking about productivity in terms of hours worked, output, very individualistic metrics. But I have to imagine most of your audience today is not working as an individual, they're working as part of a team, and maybe even a cross functional team. And so we went and did research and asked workers, how do you want to be measured? Like, what does productivity mean to you today? And it was fascinating because we compared the responses of leaders versus workers. Leaders, again, very top down metrics. Workers were asking, I want to be measured in terms of productivity as my adaptability to change, in terms of my contributions to company strategy, creativity, and innovation. Now, as a former HR person, I know that gets very difficult to actually begin to measure those things in a very quantitative way. And so, where I think some of the future is going to go to is how do we get better with qualitative metrics and actually get more comfortable with beginning to explore what does creativity and innovation actually look like? How do we measure that? How do we measure adaptability to change? Because we know those are the core characteristics of high performing organizations. And yet, we don't have the language and the measures to really get those right today.
So good. I heard a term the other day, organizational plasticity,
Mm,
and it caught my attention because of neuroplasticity for
yeah.
individuals. And so I think you're right about the metrics of the future are going to be how do we measure these other things that we actually know are the things that really matter.
Yes.
And they've always mattered, but I think we were using, like you said, work and output as proxies for
Yep.
trying to capture the thing.
Yep.
But now it's like, for example, with output, like if you have a really good secret cyborg in your company, like they've done their output in the first hour of the
Yes.
day. And then now what do they do with the extra time? And are you empowering them to put that on what will drive this business? What will expand our product offering? What will make our customers love us?
Yes.
And how do we do that?
Yes.
So I think that's wonderful. As we conclude, what advice would you give to HR leaders and business leaders who are just starting this AI journey? Like they're just getting started, and in organizations that are maybe a little bit more hesitant about adopting AI. What do they do right after they listen to us?
Yeah, Nicole, I think in a perfect world, I hope they go play with AI. This is a time to really think about how do we experiment? How do we learn? How do we play with the new technology? I worry that we've lost so much of that within our organizations. Everything is so efficiency driven and just driving to the bottom line. We have an opportunity here, to use the words of your podcast, to really tap into our human ingenuity in a way that we've never had before. I mean, truly, the power that's going to be democratized in people's hands is unbelievable with large language models and soon to be agents. And so I just encourage people get into that play mode. Think about how can I experiment with this? Take very much that curiosity, that relentless curiosity approach, because I think you're going to be surprised at how much this technology is already doing, how much is it changing, and ultimately how much more if we use this right, which is a huge caveat. But if we use this right, to your point that you were saying before, we can actually work with our human biology and not against it when we come into work each day.
And that's going to do it for this week's episode. A big thank you to you, Kelly, for sharing your experiences and deep insights with us. Before we say goodbye, I encourage you all to follow the AI+HI project wherever you enjoy your podcast. And if you enjoyed today's episodes, please take a moment to comment, leave a review. And finally, you can find all of our episodes at shrm.org/AI+HI. Thank you for joining the conversation, and we'll catch you next time on the AI+HI project.